What's up, YouTube fam? Robbie C here, and welcome back to another episode of Approach Academy powered by Prodigy. Today we're going to talk about one of the most frustrating parts of disc golf, and that is where so many people lose strokes closing out a hole from 100 feet and in. Now here in Approach Academy, we are talking about shots that you'll need to sort of close out every hole you approach. And we opened up with a definition of approach shots that I know some of you disagreed with in the first episode. My bad on that one, everyone. But really what we were trying to cover was this concept of approach shots just mean that you aren't necessarily throwing a full power shot. You're looking to have sort of control in the shot. And we started with the idea of the comfort circle. I'm not gonna spend too much time on it because, well, there's a whole video about it. But while the comfort circle creates a great aiming point, we still have to actually throw the approach shot and get there. So we wanna use today's episode to talk about one of the areas that is the most heartbreaking when you fail to capitalize from this range and in. And honestly, from this range and in, when you leave yourself with more meat on the bone than you really wanted to have. And that is those shots from around 100 feet and in. Now, all too often, I'll see an amateur player land this short of the basket, and that can be because of a few factors. One, they don't have enough distance to actually get to the hole. Two, they don't have enough accuracy and they have thrown off a little bit. Maybe they had the distance right, but they just kind of misaimed and misreleased. Now, while it can be frustrating to be this far away from the basket and realize that, hey, a birdie may or may not be on the table, what can be even more frustrating is having this short of a distance and feeling like it takes me more strokes to close this out than it did to go all the way from the tee box to here. One of the most classic ways that I'll see people mess this up is that rather than relying on an approach shot here, they just think if I want it more and I give it more on my putt, then I have the opportunity to just sort of fling one up there and see what happens. But for several people, that can still be a bit of a tester putt. What we want to cover today is two techniques that you can utilize in order to close out this 100-foot gap, not only with a little more certainty, but also perhaps start throwing it in more and scoring from this range as well. The first method we're going to use is not only the most common, but I think also the most misrepresented. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the jump putt. For a quick rules reminder when it comes to putting on the putting green. My bag is currently placed at the edge of the circle. The circle is a 33-foot radius or 10-meter circle around the basket where when I putt inside of that circle, I must demonstrate balance on my putt before trying to progress forward on the step. For very beginner players, they're gonna get this close to the basket and they're gonna sort of walk it in. Inside of the technical rules, that's gonna be a big no. Once again, I must simply just maintain balance. I can do this however I want, but no matter what I do, I just have to make sure that I have balance demonstrated for progressing over my lie, which is simply where the disc had landed in front of me. Now, outside of the circle, I do not have to demonstrate balance before progressing past my lie. Quite simply, that means that as long as the disc is out of my hand before my foot leaves the surface that is marking behind my lie, it's completely legal. That means even at 34 feet, I can simply fire one off, step over my lie straight into the bucket. First try, of course. Step putting or jump putting can create a huge advantage because you're using momentum to sort of guide and add to your putt, as opposed to a standard putt where I'm having to demonstrate balance and everything is coming down to the traditional power anchors of putts. Now, where this becomes extreme and this starts becoming an issue for several folks is when I find myself at this 100-foot and out distance. This certainly doesn't feel like a full shot, but there's no way that my traditional putt is gonna get there. And that's coming from someone who would arguably have a very good putt. For most amateurs, you're not gonna be able to have a controlled putt that flies that far. Thus, we're gonna have to rely on the jump putt. So here are a couple factors that I think everyone should look at when it comes to a jump putt. And first and foremost is height. Often when people are jump putting, they don't think about getting the disc moving forward, they think about getting the disc moving up. If I give the disc more height, then it's gonna have more time to fly and travel in a further direction. But most often, this is going to lead to bringing branches and other sorts of obstacles that are higher in the air in the way, as demonstrated by that putt that we just threw. Which puts me in some hairy situations when it comes to jump putting, because now I'm not only far away from the basket, but I'm almost having to jump putt again, and I'm lowering my confidence in getting to the basket because of the fact that I've just messed up one jump putt, so I have to like overcome and have the mental strength to say that I'm not gonna mess this one up too, which several amateurs do not have. And that's okay, because we're gonna fix it. We wanna make sure that we're giving the putter height, but that we're not launching it into the air. And that also comes with the second key feature of a great jump putt in 100 feet and in, and that is forward momentum. Most often when people are loading a jump putt, what they're gonna do is they're either gonna find themselves in sort of a full squat straddle position and then leapfrogging their way up. The problem with this is most often that leapfrog motion launches them straight up in the air, making height very difficult to control. This is where I like to use more of a fencing strategy. Yes, fencing, the Olympic sport that everyone wishes that they got really into when they were a child, but most of us don't understand the rules and we just get really excited as people are yelling and stabbing each other at the Olympics. In fencing, it's very much this side-to-side bob where weight becomes very back-loaded and they're leaping forward and striking the other opponent. We want to apply this same principle and understand that if we can get forward momentum moving in a certain direction, our disc selection can actually help us create the height so that we don't have to be so worried about going up, but more so moving forward. If this person leapfrogs straight up, you can see that eventually this arrow sort of peters out at a certain distance. However, if they go too flat, then they also are gonna struggle to have the necessary height. But if we can do just a little bit of a in-between, and not even halfway in between, just a little more on the flatter side by loading the back leg and launching the hand on the height that we want the disc to go, we're often going to find significantly more success on a jump putt. Because one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to people using jump putts for approaching is the idea that we take the opportunity of being 100 feet in and we lose the control of the putt style of it, and we're just mindlessly yeeting the disc off in the direction of the basket rather than taking the control and aiming for our comfort circle, because when we're 100 feet out, we aren't necessarily trying to make it. We just want to make sure that we're only throwing one more shot after we've thrown this approach at most. Now the third piece, and arguably the hardest to master on the jump putt, is the idea that things are just a little bit out of sync. The lag that's created between the hand firing and the legs firing often is what creates the most power on the putt. If our legs are trying to spring forward at the same time that the hand is springing forward, there is no transfer of power because all of the power is being used at the same time. However, if the legs fire first, you'll feel this momentum building into the hand and traveling up through the body for the arm to then fire forward. There are some who do the jump putt effortlessly, and it feels near impossible to tell where this slight delay exists between the lower body and the upper body. And then there are some who have about a full second, it feels like, between the lower body firing and the upper body firing, and it creates inconsistent putts. We want to find as seamless a transition as possible and delay, fire. So let's talk about the type of disc I would use as well as 2 practice drills. I mentioned that we're trying to create forward momentum, and if we pick the right disc, then we can often find ourselves letting the glide of the disc take over. And that's where the PA5 really shines. This disc has forward glide, and I would firmly believe that. Even if you're using the premium plastic like the 500 here, I think that's still fine as it has that float, but you can even go with a base plastic option as well if that's what you choose to putt with. I know for me personally, I actually bagged 2 putting putters, and one of them is about 3 to 4 grams lighter than my other one, specifically for when I want to do these longer jump putts and longer bids, because that lighter weight is going to allow it to have a little extra glide versus having to overpower a longer putt. Now, as for the drills, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking at a low ceiling opportunity. I'm 6'3", which means that these branches are about 9 feet tall. So because of that, I love this low ceiling opportunity. This means when I pop a putt and progress it forward, I'm not going to be able to give it a ton of height. If I get my height messed up on my load, I'm gonna launch it into those trees and it's gonna swat the putt down. I wanna focus on loading, creating that little bit of separation and launching the disc more out, and then let the glide of the disc take over. They're still a little bit too high. That's fine. That's why we're practicing in this drill. You can see here that I'm also weaving this right between a very small gap between these branches because I have the control, because I'm not just mindlessly tossing this in the air. Everything is controlled as I'm choosing to use this, which is precisely why I would go to a jump putt. When there is so many things to miss and so little variance, I'm forward facing the entire time and trying to launch the disc. Pros of a jump putt are that it offers that control as well as giving you sort of the easy options in keeping your eye on the target, especially if you're nervous. The cons is that it is a little more difficult to get long distance power out of it, and your jump putt certainly is gonna find a range where it taps out for distance as well, which is why we have the second option. Oftentimes you can be tempted to use a more overstable disc, like let's say the A2 or the A3 from the Approach series. The problem with these overstable discs is that usually if you give them height, the overstability is gonna take over, which is gonna cause them to crash in on hyzer, and if they land in on hyzer, there's a greater chance of them rolling away and thus ruining our 100 feet and in, because when it lands and crashes on hyzer and it rolls away, now we might roll out of our comfort circle, and then we're gonna be frustrated that we gave up another stroke 100 feet and in. Now, in full transparency, will I jump putt at times? Absolutely. Do I see most folks lean on a jump putt in this range? Absolutely. Do I feel like I have the opportunity to make up strokes on people because of this shot that I'm about to teach you? 100%. And that is what I and the coach that taught me call the flick of the wrist upshot, but you might have heard Connor over at Foundation call it the Frisbee toss. The Frisbee toss is the idea of bringing catch on the beach to your disc golf game, so that from this range, I'm not trying to necessarily park the basket, I'm just tossing a disc back to a friend, which is, if I've thrown Frisbees in my life, something I could be intimately familiar with. Now we open with the jump putt because I think the jump putt is something that you could probably take to your course and start using tomorrow. I mean, hey, if you're watching this at 11 a.m., you could take this on your lunch break. I do think that the flick of the wrist upshot or Frisbee toss approach is a little more tricky to master, but after having it in my game for several years, it's a shot that several people who have played with me have seen me throw in several times. So let's talk mechanics. The first is that this throw is all about the speed of the hand. In this throw, most often what you're gonna be doing is keeping your chest a little more forward facing, and it is all in the speed of the hand coming through. Three key elements here are that we wanna try to keep a high elbow, because when we keep a high elbow, that allows the hand to come through and fire openly. Keeping that open chest towards the target allows me to sort of see the straight line that the disc wants to be on, put that disc on that line, and send it out. When I find myself needing more power, just like I would pull back on a bowstring even farther, on this throw, the bowstring is gonna be just the slightest bit more coil and throwing the shot from there. But almost every time when we're throwing this shot, we wanna make sure that the chest is a little more forward facing as we fire. What's fascinating about this throw to me is that this is a condensed version of what we're actually trying to accomplish at the hit of the backhand throw at a high end. And as someone who feels very comfortable throwing this shot, I can't get my body to grasp the idea of doing this on a backhand shot at full power. It just makes sense, sort of, I think, like Hot Wheels on the track, and zoop, that's what we're trying to throw here. Thankfully, I have this beautiful 400 plastic, so you'll be able to see my grip from the top and bottom. For most people, when they're throwing this shot, they're gonna have some form of a modified fan grip. That means that those fingers are gonna be extended, not all the way on the rim, but not all the way out either. Some people do hold a full fan grip, and all the time you can see my thumb just sneaking through on the top side, creating just a little bit of pressure right through the top. I will also mention that when it comes to this shot, I am a bit of a lunatic, and I actually use a power grip on this shot even when I'm throwing these upshots. Power grip just simply means like this, that all of my fingers are on the rim and I'm gripping the disc in order to have it pop out of my hand consistently versus sort of opening up for a softer shot. There are obviously pros and cons to all of this. With a fan grip, the disc is gonna come out more clean and more smooth, but you're gonna have to give a little bit more hand speed in order to create the oomph to get it there. A power grip, I'm gonna have to make sure that I have some form of hand speed or else it's gonna grip lock over and move offline, or I'm gonna actively have to open my hand. Now, the last thing we'll talk about for this shot is nose angle. If you've watched any amount of form videos or distance videos on the internet, people are trying to tell you over and over again, well, young chap, you gotta get out there and you gotta make sure you throw it nose down, because if not, you're just sacrificing some distance. And while that's certainly true on drives, on this shot, we sort of want the disc to be flying nose up like a parachute and gliding, because we want the disc to have a chance to be thrown sort of chain high, but not be worried about it just buzzing way past and leaving myself with a long look on the other side. So the more I focus on using my thumb and driving the shot and pushing the shot forward, the more you can see if I focus on using my wrist, I can get that disc to be nose down. But the more I focus on pushing the shot with my thumb, and I drive into it like so, it pops that nose up, which causes the disc to be a lot more floaty, which gives me a chance to put the disc higher for a shot of going in without going too far. So standing here, I'm gonna use several Prodigy PA series and A series discs and just show you at different flights when I think about getting that track and just sending the disc forward, going fast with the hand. I'm keeping the elbow high, fast with the hand to make sure that I fire the disc. I can let this be a little nosy, a little floaty, and give it a chance to go close to the basket. PA3. And you can see if I really put some gust on it, that one looked like it was gonna go super far, but it still ends up close to the basket. PA5, this one has a little more glide, so I'm gonna put it a little lower. There, I don't give the glide enough respect and it glides way past. These are things that as you're learning and throwing these discs, you're gonna have to find how much height can you give it. What's the wind doing? Switching to the A series, I have an A5. You can see with a more overstable disc, I can even hang this wide and it's gonna fight back because when thrown nose up, it's gonna be a little more overstable. And these can all land close to the basket. And these are all A3s. You're going to make some adjustments based on how high or low you bring the disc in order to fire it through. There are a few more nuances to this throw, and if you want, we can definitely talk about them later on in the series as well, if you're interested in that flick of the wrist up shot. I definitely have other videos on my channel, but I'd be happy to revisit them as I've been using that shot for several years now, and sort of how I teach it can adjust along the way. The biggest thing I want to highlight here when it comes to the flick of the wrist up shot is that on jump putts, you can try to give it a chance, but normally you're okay just landing in the comfort circle. On these flick of the wrist up shots, the reason that I would choose to go with this is because I want to somewhat give an honest bid or an honest attempt at making the birdie or throwing in from there for whatever shot it may be. This can be a super helpful shot if you don't have a ton of distance because it allows you to get a little more close to the basket and some longer looks that you may not have had. So these three were all short of the basket. So for my standard of wanting to use this shot, those were not great opportunities. However, the A3 landed behind the basket. That's great. I know that I ended up pulling this a little wide. I look at this A5 and this PA3 that are right back here. These are perfect. These are the exact types of bids that I'm looking for when I'm making this throw in this attempt. Conversely, when I come back here and I look at this PA5 that I gave way no respect to the glide of it, I'm significantly farther away. And therefore, while this had a better chance of going in, and I almost made the putt, it's still far away, and not being able to convert at that range, well, that makes it not necessarily a great shot. So you're gonna have to mess around with this shot to find what is your comfort range, and when you're doing this drill, almost set up a point system. If you hit metal, that's a certain amount of points. If you throw it in, that's a certain amount of points. If you land within your comfort circle on the backside of the basket, that's points. Anything outside of the comfort circle, negative points, and anything on the front side of your basket, also negative points. Now, what discs are you gonna wanna use for this shot? Well, you kind of guessed it. We're looking for putters, and while the A series and the overstable options that exist inside of it can be fine, we're gonna use these for shots later on in the Approach Academy that are gonna be pretty fantastic. Which means the PA series is really gonna shine here. I know we talked about the A5s being great for the jump putt approaches, and I think they can be phenomenal for this shot as well. You just have to decide and get the practice in. Because they have so much extra glide, it can be way easier to sort of float these discs there. But it also means that if you commit to the shot, which you are gonna need to do, they do have a higher chance of floating away from you. So I like to lean on the PA3 or the PA2 for this shot. I think are both phenomenal options as they have a little bit of stability so that if you accidentally do yoink one by overcommitting the chest and turning and spinning the hand too fast or too wide, it still has enough to hook, but it isn't so overstable that it's trying to fight out or brings that hyzer landing into play. Now, the last thing that I'll say about this, and it's a fun game that I know this is certainly one that you can start practicing more often, even if you don't want to go to a field and practice this, or you want to try this in your backyard. There's a great exercise to just pick 2 or 3 discs that you want to try to learn this shot with, and every time you go play a round, play a game within your round. You're going to play that exact game I was talking about of a certain amount of points for hitting metal. Whether you parked it or not, you're going to stop about 75, 100 feet short of the basket, throw those 3 shots, pick them up. And I bet if you do that for a month and every single round you play, not only are you gonna have more fun with your friends to have an extra level of competition, who knows, throw a Diet Coke on the line for me. But I bet you would start to see yourself throw in more shots, which would give you even more confidence that you can actually close out and get better looks at several holes. If you've been following along in the Birdie Bash series that we've been doing, where we're trying to birdie every hole in Birmingham, there are several holes where I just need to have this flick of the wrist upshot if I'm ever gonna get a birdie on that hole. So with all that said, I wanna thank you so much for watching and tuning into another episode of Approach Academy powered by Prodigy, and I'm looking forward to episode 3. What do you guys think episode 3 is gonna be about? Are we finally gonna start talking overstable discs and forehand approaches? We're talking backhand approaches? I don't know. but it's gonna be a fantastic one. So thank you to Will and the team for sponsoring and believing what we're doing here on the Robbie C channel, and for believing in you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Please make it fantastic for someone else too. But for now, we are gonna leave you with the birdie.